The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Well, hello to all our weirdos and weirdettes out there listening. Tonight, my regular co-host, Jen Durrell, is actually at a paranormal conference and investigation. And I think she told me to say, is it Ghost? It's National Ghost Watching Day or National or International Ghost Hunting Day or something. So it's an
Didn't know that.
appropriate, it's an appropriate day for her not to be here. But anyway, I have my other baby with me tonight. So hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
The wonderful Jason McLean from Siru
Yes.
Papers and from Texas Front Porch, and who also co-hosts Mysterious Library with me here on Untold
that other
Radio
thing.
Network every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Central.
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm doing
It's been
good,
so
man.
long. It's been so long since we talked. I mean, we were just on Phantoms and Monsters last night, so
Yeah, we did that together, the Lon Strickler show, which was a lot of fun. And of course, as I said, Mysterious Library. Speaking of Untold Radio, I'll say this up front so I don't forget. People should go to
yes.
untoldradio.am and you can scroll down to below where all the show icons are, and you can leave us a voice message. You can actually record it right there on the site and say, hey, this is for Talking Weird, or this is for Mysterious Library rather, or this is for any other show on the network. Just specify, and you can tell us of one of your experiences and say you would like to have it played on the show, or you could give us some feedback. We might even play that on the show.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great feature. I love that
Yeah.
Doug set that up because it's going to be really interesting once people start calling in. Sky's the limit on that kind of stuff. And there's so much coming on the website, guys. You got to, flag it, go visit. New things are always coming. And you can, if you miss the live, you can go and listen to all the other shows. There's 9 shows on this channel. It's an amazing channel. There's an amazing lineup and group of people that Doug has assembled. So do go make that your next favorite website.
It should be everybody's favorite website.
It should be
mine now. But yeah, no, leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And so, what else is new in the realm of Jason since I talked to you yesterday?
Since last night, honestly, not a heck of a whole lot, all things considered. Honestly, I spent the day doing laundry and cleaning around the house today.
See, sometimes when I ask Jen that question, she'll have had an apparition or a ghost did something. Or
no, the most exciting thing I did was binge a few episodes of the new Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. I finally got Paramount Plus. So I was able to watch it. I have to admit, okay, I put up with the first 3 or 4 seasons. I can't even remember of Discovery. I tried really hard to care, and I couldn't. After they got them into the future and all, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm out. This feels like new. Like this really does feel more like Star Trek. So I loved it. I'm not done yet, but that's the most interesting thing I did today.
It's funny.
Watch Star Trek.
It's funny you were watching some sci-fi. I watch hardly any television these days. I just don't have the time because, with homeschooling my daughter and yada, 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 we're all busy. Anyway, it's not me complaining. Everybody's got a busy life. It's just the nature of things today. But what I've started watching recently, because it's on Freevee and I don't have to pay for it, is the last 2 seasons of the X-Files, the ones they rebooted, because I was such a massive fan of the first 9 seasons. I mean, they were such a part of my life. And for some reason, I think I was super busy. I think it was around the time my daughter was born when they dropped the first and second, the new season 10 and 11 or whatever the
Something
last
like
two were. So I think I'd seen some of the first episode when it dropped, but that was it. And I saw it was on Freevee and I thought, you know what, I'm going to start watching this. And I think there's a real weird sentimentality to watching it, to seeing like Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. They're both so much older, and it's I don't know. It's like for me, it's very sentimental. It's weird watching it. It was never a sentimental journey when I used to watch the X-Files. Now I watched it, I'm like, oh, wow.
I have to admit, I haven't seen the new ones yet. I haven't seen them yet.
They're good. They're good so far. I've only watched like 5 episodes, but they're good so far. Hey, Ken Rock's joined us. Mothman 46 has joined us. It's lovely to have you both there. But rather than you and me keep talking about Star Trek and the X-Files and the like, I'm sure we can ask tonight's guest actually a little bit about science fiction, because I know he's interested. He's fantastic. I'm so glad we have him. He started watching the skies from his hometown of Willimantic, Connecticut, inspired in part by the launch of Sputnik and by all the science fiction movies that he saw at Saturday afternoon children's matinees in local theaters. See, I told you he was a sci-fi fan. As a teenager, he joined the American Association of Variable Star Observers, a citizen science organization which tracks the brightness, changes of eclipsing, pulsating, and exploding stars. After obtaining a BA degree in astronomy from Wesleyan University and a PhD in astronomy from Yale, he spent 2 years as a Carnegie Fellow in Pasadena, California. After that, he became a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Michigan State University, from which he is now retired into emeritus status. He is the author or co-author of more than 100 scientific papers and 2 books on pulsating stars. Yeah, I'll say wow. He has been privileged to observe at the Mount Wilson Observatory, the Palomar Observatory, Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory, Kitt Peak National Observatory, and the SOAR telescope, and has participated in studies using the Hubble Space Telescope. He's also interested in history and has written Willimantic Skies, a book which I just read. It's just a wonderful book, and we'll be talking about that a little bit tonight, as well as Stars Over the Red Cedars, and which is a history of the MSU campus observatories, and an annotated book on the Civil War letters of Samuel Bliss. Together with Edward Guimont, he has written a book about the writer H.P. Lovecraft's interest in astronomy, which will be published in 2023. And I just can't wait to read that book, because I'm such a Lovecraft fan, as everybody who's a regular viewer or listener knows. And he still watches the skies when he can. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show Emeritus Professor Horace Smith.
Hey, Horace.
Hello. Well, I'm delighted to be here.
Greetings, Horace. We're delighted to have you.
Well, it's I've been watching you people, not that long, a few weeks, since I came across Dean's program, I think, The Mysterious Library, the predecessor of the current one. And it was this episode on Lovecraft and Derleth that got me watching you.
No, I think I remember that's when we started chatting. I'm in August Derleth territory now. I'm not that far from Sauk City. It's, only a couple of hours away.
There used to be, I don't know if there still is, a Derleth Society there.
Yeah, apparently it's still there. I think Arkham House, the publishing house that saved essentially Lovecraft, which August Derleth founded, is still based out of Sauk City as well. It's fascinating. Fascinating.
I did not know that.
But speaking of science fiction and Lovecraft, and obviously, your background, considerable background in astronomy, I guess that's probably the first thing I was just curious, and I thought it might be a nice jumping off point. How did you find those interests coalesced, like the hard, proper scientific interest in astronomy, as well as those sci-fi matinees that you talked about? Can you talk a little bit about the overlap and how it started you on your journey?
Well, it probably all coalesced about 1957. I was about 5 years old at the time, old enough to go to the kiddie matinees. No adult wanted to be at those kiddie matinees. Willimantic is a little factory town, and it had a theater, the Gem Theater, that for a dime or whatever, you could go into the kiddie matinee on Saturday afternoon, and they'd show all kinds of movies, but a lot of science fiction movies. And no adult would want to be with those 300 or 400 screaming children locked into that theater. So it was mostly the kids. My father did go once with us. And during the dramatic moment, I think the movie was Rodan, about the giant Japanese movie about a giant flying monster.
Yep, the pterosaur.
Yes,
Love that
where
movie.
it's a quiet moment in the film. All the kids are on the edge of their seats. And suddenly my father rings out loudly, "Well, this is the silliest blankety-blank movie I've ever seen."
Oh, that's
Not
awesome.
saying blankety-blank, however. So
That's awesome.
it's best if the parents didn't go to those movies. And that's probably where I first heard about space travel, was in those kind of science fiction movies. I may have seen at some point in the 50s there was a Disney thing with Werner von Braun on space travel, but it had less effect on me than those movies. But also in 1957, when those movies were being watched, Sputnik was launched.
Yes.
And I think I saw not Sputnik itself, which was pretty faint, but its booster rocket also went into orbit. And that was bright enough that you could see. And I remember being taken out on the street and everyone was pointing up at the sky at the object going over, and I understood that object was Sputnik. Well, it probably wasn't, as I said. It was a booster rocket. Right. Assuming they got that right at all, but I didn't know. I believed him. So there was that. There were also, after a long drought, there were 2 bright comets in 1957. And finally, around 1957-58 was one of the peaks in solar activity. There were a lot of northern lights visible down into intermediate latitudes. I'm sure Dean probably is familiar with seeing northern lights from his current location. But there were a lot of bright ones, and I was let outdoors to watch the rays of northern lights rising into the sky in the north, and then a bright glow overhead on some other occasions. And astronomy had me at that time. Now, it wasn't my only interest. I liked biology. I liked, when I was old enough, I had my own microscope, looking at the little parameciums moving around on the slide. And I was always afraid. I didn't want to kill the parameciums, so I kept making sure they had enough water to keep swimming. And I started reading history books as well. So all that was together, and I've also but in the end, the interest in astronomy began to win out, and I used to start spending evenings out in the backyard, so lying in a lounge chair, looking up at the sky, counting the number of meteors that I could see. And one of my first occasions where I thought I saw something unusual, I thought I saw a bright light going behind some trees. It looked very unusual. And I was out of that lounge chair and chasing after it to try to get a better view. I was running down the street. Alas, I never caught up with it. But if a UFO had landed around the corner, I would have been on it before Gort or the robots could have stopped me. I would have been there. But I never caught up with it. But I've enjoyed watching the sky ever since. It's a marvelous mixture of things that are the same as in your childhood. The constellations pretty much look the same, but things that change, the aurora, the meteors, the stars that change in brightness, and I think that's a wonderful combination.
The eternal and the ephemeral,
yes,
all in the same place. Quick question on the meteors. So I have seen a number of meteorites essentially make landfall. Kind of looking for them. There was a long period of time where I was working third shift, but they were always green. The ones that I saw. Why is it that? Because I knew, like, I've seen a couple, again, living in Texas. I've seen back when we had shuttles. I've seen a couple shuttle reentries and they were glowing green. I know it's because of the ionization of the speed of the atmosphere, the speed that they're in. But why is it that some meteorites, when they are making landfall, why would they glow green?
There are two different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One is that is probably more appropriate to the space shuttle, is that one of the atmospheric lines that can be excited in reentry is a green line of oxygen. And that's also very bright in some displays of northern lights. But another property of the meteors, I've seen some very bright green meteors myself, and that can be the chemicals within the meteor in the air. I think I recall, if I recall right, copper makes.
Oh, copper makes
can
green.
make one of the green colors.
Okay.
But it also has to be a pretty bright meteor for your eye color sensors to have a good chance of witnessing the color. If it's just a faint meteor, the part of your eye that detects light and dark will see it, but the color won't be detected very well.
Well, these actually made landfall, or earthfall. They were within a mile or two of where I was at the time. So these weren't just in the sky. These made impact. Now, again, by the time they impacted, they were probably the size of a pebble. I could never find them, but I always wondered why they would glow green when if they would make earthfall so close.
Well, I as I said, I've seen bright meteors that are green, as you said. The brightest one I've seen was not, though, so it wasn't everyone. I was out one time and suddenly all the ground lit up. And someone said, "Who's got a flashlight?" But it was, in fact, a brilliant fireball overhead.
Those are
You
amazing.
also have to be careful in meteors, is they're often farther away than you judge. So it's better to have multiple people in different locations so that you can triangulate to the location. And even there, they can sometimes burn out before they hit the ground and break apart, and the pieces can be scattered over. We had one in Michigan a few years ago that was widely seen. There was the sonic booms that shook everyone. That was in the winter. And people went out looking for it. I did, but we didn't find anything. Debbie and I didn't come across it. But but people did find pieces, and they were helped because although Michigan isn't a great place for finding meteors because it's swampy and there are a lot of trees,
right?
But there were ice on lakes, and that's where a number of the pieces were found, sitting on the ice, on top of the ice.
Wow. That's interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to digress. It's just, well, hey, might as well ask a real astronomer these questions. Because I do want to talk about Willimantic skies towards the end. Again, just because I'm gonna deviate the question just a little bit. As a fan of sci-fi, what is your favorite science fiction show? Understanding the only correct answer is Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 is there, but The Next Generation is my favorite.
Understood. All right. Well, you've lost all respect. I'll get rid of him. Yeah.
I started out with both. I did know how to distinguish between Lost in Space and Star Trek the original when they were both on television. I knew Star Trek the original was far superior, even though Dr. Smith was in the Lost in Space. But
yes. Well, and here's the connection. Billy Mummy, who played the youngest
Will
his name?
Robinson.
Will, yeah, he played Will Robinson in Lost in Space. Played Lanier in Babylon 5. So there you go. There's a connection.
And wasn't
Anything?
he also in that early Twilight Zone where he was
Yes.
the one who could wish people into the
cornfield? Yep, that was him. He also did a guest appearance on an episode of Deep Space Nine. He played an engineer who gets killed in the episode. He's there. He talks to everybody. He makes an impact, and he's one of the guest stars who gets murdered by the Jem'Hadar, I think. Okay, well, there you go.
I can never get beyond Kirk as captain. I mean, he's always my captain. Anything beyond that in the Star Trek universe, I'm not interested in. Sounds terrible, but it's true. You know what?
Ben Sisko, man. I love Ben Sisko.
Yeah, I don't even know who Ben Sisko is.
So. Oh, Deep Space Nine. You got to watch Deep Space Nine.
I'm terrible.
I'm ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of you, Dean. Never mind. I'll get rid of Dean. Horace, you can.
You guys can just talk Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5 for the rest of the show. When we're talking about being outside and looking at the skies, which has obviously been a massive part of your life, Horace, I always, and correct me if I'm wrong, I always suspect that your average layperson isn't as interested in looking up anymore. Like and we're going to talk about Willimantic Skies later, as Jason said, but in that book, you get a real sense of how important the heavens were up until Sputnik, right? You get this real sense that people were up watching the skies. Maybe it's because there was less light pollution. Maybe people spent more time outside. Maybe there was less choice on TV. But to me, it seems not many people spend time just looking at the heavens anymore. Is that something outside of professional astronomers, of course? Is that something you feel, or is that something you're conscious of? I think
that's true. Of course, there are a lot of competing things like television and internet now, but the light pollution is, I think, one problem. The skies in the city are so brightly lit up now that you can see Venus and you can see Jupiter and the moon, but the whole array of stars is largely hidden. And I think that's a shame. Also, when you go back to the 1700s and 1800s, people were still using the sun and the stars to determine the position. There was obviously no GPS at the time. They were using celestial navigation and having trouble doing it at first because of the difficulty of latitude was pretty easy, but longitude was hard. Yep. And they were finding timekeeping. The determination of the calendar was based upon astronomical observations. And almanacs were one of the first things published in the new American colonies of Britain. Now, they had a lot of astrology, too, in them at the time. They mostly related to illness or what time to plant your garden by the stars, other than the calendar, but just the way the moon would affect the growth of your plants.
I still buy the old Farmer's Almanac every year, by the way. I have a whole, it's a lovely book, and it makes me think again of those older times. But it's wonderful that continues.
I was amused to recently get a book from about 1882 that was published in Great Britain, and it was the Country Gentleman's Guide to Using a Transit Telescope. So I always imagined you would use the transit telescope to get the local time on your country estate, and I always imagined the country squire telling Jeeves to go out and take a measurement of the stars so they could determine what the time was.
Awesome.
Happier times.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they were happier, but they certainly were more amusing to us. Okay. Quick question, because there was a topic you really wanted to address, and I think it's going to definitely kick this off a little bit. But I do question, if there was just like one thing that you could say to everyone, right? Not just the people watching here, but just all of humanity about astronomy, about the sky, the stars, what would that be?
I would say not the big picture, like our place in the universe, I would say it's a part of the nature around us. And don't forget to, if you look at birds, if you look at squirrels, if you just go outdoors and look at the trees, don't forget to look at the sky, look at the stars too. See how they make you feel a part of the universe around us. That there's all that's out there beyond just what's in our immediate neighborhood, and you can see it and you can enjoy it. And I think for the individual person, that may lead to all kinds of other things. It may think to thinking more about nature. It may lead to reading. It may lead to maybe a spiritual change if you're. It may lead to looking into religion if you're a religious person. All that is, I think, can be helped by just looking at what's around you and not forgetting that the sky is part of that.
Well, that was very much part of the biblical tradition, the idea that the stars and the skies were put there for multiple purposes, including the potentiality to give us signs. And that's something else which I think people have forgotten. I'm not talking about a simple astrology. I'm talking about, something of a very, I suppose, biblical cosmic significance. But I think as people look up less, they forget that significance of the heavens as well.
Yes, people know about the Star of Bethlehem, but in terms of biblical connections, that's probably about it in terms of the astronomy.
Oh yeah, astronomy was massive to them. Again, we don't appreciate how important astronomy was to the ancient world. I mean, really, again, to your point, up until the last 70, 80 years. I mean, with light pollution, I mean, everyone did everything by the stars. It was massively important, but I can't help but notice this is not really why people have come to this show. They want to hear your thoughts on UFOs.
Okay.
Are they little green men flying in tin cans, or are they something more exotic?
Well, maybe I should start with my own, what have I seen myself after all these years of looking up? And I've seen some things that count as UFOs to me, that they were unidentified. But I'm going to have to disappoint people in that I don't think they looked like very ET kind of things. I was down observing, for example, from Chile in the Andes Mountains.
Oh wow!
One time at Cerro Inter-American Observatory. Now, in the old days, nowadays, the observer at the telescope is often sitting in a data room watching a computer screen.
Yeah.
Or may even be up in the United States observing with a telescope in Chile, looking at a computer screen. But then when I'm old enough that when you started out, you're in the dome, you had at least an opening to the sky and you could look up. And suddenly this kind of smoke ring kind of object begins drifting across the sky, about the size of the full moon, for example.
Oh, wow.
And moving right along, not really looking like a solid-edged object. And I tried to swing the telescope. I had the spectroscope on the telescope. I tried to swing the telescope around to it, but the telescope wasn't made for tracking an object moving that speed. And so it went by and over out of sight and was gone. So I think I didn't know what that was. It's a UFO to me. But if I was asked what it's likely to have been, what do I think it's likely to have been? I think it's likely to have been some kind of burn or dump from from an orbiting spacecraft. That would make kind of a nebulous kind of thing. It may have been expanding slightly too as I watched it, which makes sense. So an artificial thing, but quite likely a terrestrial origin rather than ET. And the other things that have been unknown to me, one, I saw an UFO became an IFO, an identified flying object for me, that I am embarrassed to admit that I didn't know, that I was so puzzled by it at first. I was up on the rooftop of our physics building getting ready to have a class up on the roof. And it's a windy night. Suddenly I see an object moving through the air. It looked like two lights rapidly revolving around one another and moving through the sky. And so what is that? I don't know anything that is spinning like that and moving rapidly. Wouldn't be a plane because it's obviously spinning around a center. And I was puzzled. And then the strong wind blows it near me. I can see it's a spinning plastic bag. Like, and I was glad no one was there to see me see my puzzlement be enlightened, and that I was caught out by the spinning plastic bag. But I think it is true that a lot of the times, if the wind hadn't carried it near me, a lot of the times you just do not have all the information that you would need to try to tell a real UFO from an IFO. It's if you're observing from the ground and what you're seeing is a light moving through the sky, I think it's really hard to tell. That's I've seen a couple episodes of that Skinwalker Ranch program. And I've always been surprised when they see a light in the sky. I say, why don't you have two cameras set up a distance apart? So if you see a light in the sky, you can do geometry and tell how far away it is and how fast it's moving, rather than a single camera that just shows a light moving through the sky.
They need you as a consultant on that show, Horace.
I don't think they'd choose my. They'll pay for me to be a consultant, but
well, I think it goes back to because then they wouldn't be able to say, well, I don't know what that was. I've never seen anything like it. And
probably.
And again, they know they could do it. They're choosing not to. Dean, there was a great question.
Yeah, it was from it's from somebody at the network. It might even be from Doug. And it says, saw a slow fireball in Fayetteville years ago at arm's length, was 1.5 feet. I think that's it. Or was that 1.5 inches? Changed colors, bright green, blue, yellow, red, and had a huge spark trail. Any color changes a normal occurrence? Do you know the answer to that?
If it's a very slow fireball, there's another thing to consider. Was it re-entering space debris? Because that usually goes slower than the typical meteor. And as it breaks apart and different parts of it are exposed to the atmosphere, you can have different patterns of light displayed. But I've seen that a couple of re-entries. I haven't seen anything that did quite like what you describe, however. So I can't really answer exactly what it was that you saw. There is that famous story from 1913. I did a little write-up on it and posted it. I think I sent the link to Dean, but I don't know if he ever had a chance to look at it. There was in one of Fort's books, he talks about the 1913 fireball procession. A series of slow-moving objects across the sky. And I have a little write-up on it, and they've been traced from Canada, that same procession of fireballs, all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean, some 6,000 or 7,000 miles.
Oh, wow.
And moving at a slow speed. And one of the proposals is that there were a natural satellite of the Earth. That's something that came in at just the right orientation and speed to be temporarily grabbed and go part of the way around the Earth, at least as the orbit. People looked for the records to see if they completed a complete orbit, but no one has found that. So sometimes people say, well, maybe they were spaceships, an array of spaceships, but the actual observations of the objects themselves looked like fireball meteors from the report. And whatever it was low enough in the sky over the Toronto area that there were sonic booms and
wow,
noises spread that area. but just in that area. Um,
Hmm.
So it's an interesting issue. And some of the later UFO people appear. I mean, there were discussions of this procession have gone on for decades now. Nobody had any photographs, so this is all eyewitness
Mm-hmm.
observations. But there were a lot of eyewitnesses, and the some of the people who later appeared in the UFO controversy appear in the later discussion of this. Donald Menzel of the famed Harvard UFO debunker appears, trying to think of what's trying to explain this away, and another meteor watcher, Wiley from Iowa, thought it wasn't a meteor procession at all. It was a mistake, and I think the observations clearly show that that view is incorrect. And people like Lincoln La Paz, who was involved in the Green Fireball story over in New Mexico in the early days of UFO studies, is one of the people who promoted the investigation of this later on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still exactly what happened is a mystery, although I think it's most likely to be some kind of unusual natural phenomenon. But it's interesting how, in some of these cases anyway, there can be hundreds of ground-based observers. You can do the old triangulation to try to figure out how the actual path was in the sky. But it requires that an object be bright and high up so that a lot of people have the ability to see it. And some of those things had entered the astronomical literature very early on in 1913 and has been debated in papers for decades ever since. Unless another one happens, we probably won't arrive at a final solution.
There was a follow-up too from Untold Radio AM, which I think is probably Doug. Hi, check. Thanks for watching, Doug.
Yes.
And that was about the fireball he saw in Fayetteville. It traveled north horizontal and was seen even in Raleigh, North Carolina, 110 miles away. It was very horizontal in flight path.
Yeah, one should not think that meteors have to look like they're going down or up. They can look like they're going horizontal depending on how the path is compared to where your location is. 110 miles is fine, is okay if the object is high up when you see it. Now remember, some of these meteors become visible when they're 60, 70 miles above the ground. So just like satellites, they can be seen over a wide distance. And there's an organization, the American Meteor Society, that has a webpage where if you see a bright fireball, you can go to that webpage and report your observation. And if they get enough observations from people in different locations, they can do the geometry, try to figure out what the actual path of the fireball was in the sky. And a lot of the individual observations may not be of high accuracy because people caught by surprise by this object going in front of them. But if they get enough people observing, and sometimes they get hundreds of people reporting these things, you can pin down very well. And of course, the government has some tracking things that for things high up in the sky that they don't ordinarily release the data on, at least not right off the bat. And of course, that ties into that to bright fireballs. One of the things they have looking down are devices that detect hot things. So they're interested in if someone's launching a rocket, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Or if they're in a big explosion, you want to know about it if you're in the Department of Defense. But they detect these objects, other objects as well, including bright meteors. Big meteors can be detected. They don't tell us exactly what the limits are of their devices. That is generally presumably classified information. But from time to time and on petitioning, they will release information about certain objects and if you get good enough information from them, that can help determine the orbit of the object that was seen. So these not ordinarily looking down, these are not the radar observations. These are objects that do measure the speed of the object moving to the sky, or you can determine the speed and the temperature of the fireball and how the brightness changes during the path of the object. And that's in fact involved in that discussion of whether there are meteors, some meteors in the sky that come from outside our solar system.
Speaking of outside our solar system, there was a recent article Dean shared with us about a potential extrasolar object that has entered, and he thinks it could, there's, of course, once this happens, like the previous one, Umbumbu. I'm not
or something.
Something that I've never pronounced anything correctly in my life. So,
Muamua is a Hawaiian word, presumably for scout. It said, and it was given to an object. Now, this is a fairly large, hundreds of meters object.
Yeah.
So not one of these meters. It was identified after it had already come into our solar system, gone around the sun. It wasn't picked up until it was already heading out of the solar system. And this was found by ordinary techniques, imaging techniques, not by any of this Department of Defense fancy stuff.
Right.
And, well, that by itself is not unusual. But if you get enough observations, you can calculate the orbit. And a lot of the orbits of these things might go, say, back out to the asteroid belt, or be constrained at any rate within the solar system, but not so. Oumuamua seemed to come in from outside the solar system when you did the orbit. It seemed to be moving out of the solar system again. And it was a rather unusual object, too, because it was a tumbling object, and the estimates that were made of its size had it, some of the determinations had it much longer than it was wide. Now, I should say you've seen a lot of pictures. If you go to the web, you'll see a lot of pictures showing this big rocky object, this elongated. That's totally an artist's conception.
Yeah.
The what you actually observe is a point of light, a light that's changing in brightness as it tumbles, and the fine details were not visible at the millions of miles.
Yeah,
that the object was. So maybe it looked like what that artist's picture was, but maybe it didn't. And that was the existence of that object reminded people of A Rendezvous with Rama, the Arthur C. Clarke novel of kind of object coming in that turns out to be an artificial spacecraft. And I particularly thought that when the object began to accelerate a little bit from non-gravitational way. Avi Loeb at Harvard has put forward the idea of wondering it was some kind of interplanetary solar sail kind of object that was ET kind of device. I don't think he's persuaded a lot of people, and the evidence isn't really that strong because you get acceleration from outgassing too. If something like comets give off when they get near the sun and heat up, they can evaporate and shoot off gases and cause acceleration.
So no little green men riding the space rock, huh?
Not that you could clearly tell. Obviously, you'd need to get a lot nearer to it to really probably tell, or it would have to slow down and go into orbit. around the sun, then you know that
Something
it
can
was
happen.
something not natural. Yeah.
Do you
But
have any thoughts on the Black Knight satellite, Horace? Which I know a lot of people have
Black Knight
suggested might
was,
be extraterrestrial.
and correct me if I get any of the story wrong, but the story goes back, I think, to the 1950s, and Donald Kehoe, who was very involved in the founding of NICAP, one of the original UFO
Mhm.
groups. And I believe it was he who released to the press in the 1950s that the government had found, before the days of Sputnik, that the Earth was being orbited by a satellite. And he's claimed that there were radar at the time that showed it was at an altitude of something like 400 or 600 feet, and there might be two of them. Later on, this was connected with a picture of many years later, of an object that was taken from space that some people said was the same Dark Knight satellite, although I don't suppose you wouldn't necessarily have to connect the two. And I've been skeptical on two grounds of this, three grounds really. One, Kehoe, the only source of the original statement, Donald Kehoe, was claiming that radar had showed these objects to be satellites. But actually in the early 1950s, about 1954, 53, that he's talking about, the radar really wasn't that good for objects up in space. The radar that would be developed later for detecting intercontinental ballistic missiles and space debris hadn't really been made yet. We forget how gradually it took us to build up the technology of radar, able to detect, go beyond a very limited range. Even for civil aviation, much of the U.S. was not covered by radar back in the early 1950s. So I'm dubious of the radar capabilities to have found something, unless it was really big, in which case you probably would have seen it by other means back at that time. And that object seen later on, I'm not sure it's just whether it's a piece of space debris that we launched, because by later on, we've been launching things, so there's space debris up there, not necessarily ET. The thing in early 1950s was before there had been any space program, or a space program that had orbiting objects. And at that time, Clyde Tombaugh, who was the discoverer of Pluto, carried out a search. He said, we're going to be we have this program to launch satellites. If we're going to have a search for natural satellites of the Earth, we better do it now before we stop launching things, or you'll never know whether there's something other than the moon up there. So he did carry out a search within certain limits, and his results of that are online. And he didn't find anything. Now, there were limits to that search. It was a photographic search, and you couldn't cover all distances, all locations fully, completely. But the Tombaugh search didn't see any natural satellites, at least in stable orbits around the Earth at the time. You can have things that come in temporarily and then burn up on the next trip around or something. So I'm skeptical of that Black Knight report, and I must admit there's probably a lot of it, however, that I haven't gone into lately.
That's okay.
Now it leads to the whole issue of government secrecy and such, and I can only say a little bit about that, in that nobody's ever told me don't report that thing you've seen in the sky. Of course, I haven't had a lot of things that they would need to tell me don't report. But I've known people who have been involved. I've known people who have been in the the head of for example, the nuclear testing programs at Los Alamos, and known them well, and I've never seen any hint from the people I know and know well that anyone's told them not to report anything.
But that is what somebody who's been told not to say something would say.
That's true, unless he whispered it to me behind a locked door.
That kind of leads.
And I couldn't tell you.
Other than just quickly, other than direct government, like, cover-ups and secrecy, it leads to something. I know we wanted to get into talking about paradigms and the like, and this might be a nice segue into that. Now, you say you've never been told not to report something. I know Jacques Vallée, in one of his early works, I think it might be one of his journals, talks about his time when he was working in observatories in France, and that reports of anomalous phenomena, and this leads back into the discussion we started a little bit about Charles Fort before, who has a very well-known animosity for astronomers. Vallée said that there were reports of things and they were just ignored. They were not recorded. He learned very soon that you didn't talk about things that seemed to be UFOs. Now, I don't know if that was ever the culture here in astronomy in the United States of America, or if you've ever experienced that.
I might say that astronomers aren't always the best people to see these things either. A number of astronomers come into the thing from physics. They might not know Arcturus from Sirius, they point coordinates on the telescope. And nowadays they sit inside in the data room. They don't look at the actual sky.
Yeah.
The people who see the things more often or get the reports to them, I think, are two. I'd choose the experienced amateur astronomers who are out on the open sky. And even they now are getting their CCD cameras and digital cameras and looking at a computer screen instead of the sky. And people run planetariums because that's often who get the report. That was the case at Michigan State University. Fairly rarely would the public call the observatory. They would call Abrams Planetarium because that's where they went and saw the star shows. That's where they knew. Right.
That's the more public-facing aspect of it.
And they would the people at the planetarium would try to tell them what was happening, but they didn't go out and do any follow-up for the most part. I did get one call once, and someone said there were nightly UFOs going over. So I went over on a night to join them. And in that case, the woman there, they were seeing the UFOs going over, but I wasn't when I was standing next to her. So either that person was having some kind of a mental issue, or it's a paranormal thing, and I never see paranormal things. I don't see ghosts. Yep. I don't see any of that stuff. I haunt graveyards. I love the old New England gravestones and the memento mori carvings. I love Indian Native American mounds in the Midwest and with their possible celestial orientations, and old houses from New England and things. But no ghost ever bumps me or pushes me. So if there are sensitives, I'm an unsensitive.
You're insensitive.
That's a good point, though, because astronomers are obviously clearly capable of seeing things which are in the heavens. But I think it was either Vallée or Hynek or one of those type of heavy hitters back in the day suggested that astronomers in some cases aren't the best people to look at these things anyway, because a lot of things are happening on the ground or happening in an encounter on a back road or something hovering, just 100 feet above, which are kind of out of, I suppose, whatever the mandate is for astronomers to be looking at anyway.
If it's a swamp gas or something, an astronomer won't know that more than your neighbor. What that is?
Not swamp gas specialists,
but I've never actually seen them. We have plenty of swamps around here, but Mosquitoes are more of what I encounter when I go out to them.
We have them here as well. Very swampy area I live in.
But so I go look every time we're out at night, and I still go out just stargazing. I keep looking up, but I've never seen anything that would be of the truly mysterious in that sense of an ET like device or even a paranormal encounter. I've never had Bigfoot come up on me, but then I've never had a bear come up either while I've been out there. Skunk are another issue, but
so how do you? We were going to talk about paradigm, so let's shift to that real quick. Working in the paradigm of astronomy, do you think that the idea of extraterrestrial visitation was excluded? Like, was it something which people didn't want to talk about within the science of astronomy?
There were different parts of it. Yes, particularly, I think it's this kind of there was a paper published once in an astronomy journal that talked about the herd instinct in astronomy, where it probably may fit your idea, Dean, of the astronomers resembling a herd of buffaloes that go galloping along in a particular direction until suddenly at some signal they switch and equally united gallop off in a different direction. Now, I think the idea of extraterrestrial life was, with the exception of Mars, where for a long time people thought there might be by plant life at least, was kind of looked on askance up until, say, the 50s. And then in the 50s, I think the oddness, the weirdness of a lot of those early UFO contactee reports scared a lot of people off from considering the issue as a serious scientific issue. When I was a kid growing up, I went to our local library and I took out books on astronomy and said, well, there's these books on UFOs too. And one of the books I took out was the one that was at least half written by Adamski.
Flying saucers have landed.
And when I read that, I said, this is weird. I don't think I believe this. And I think that is an effect on astronomy. Astronomer, if you're an astronomer in the 1950s, the space program is on. You might want to be part of that. You want to be an observer. You don't want to be associated with things that are in the news, odd things that are in the newspaper headline, with people that you don't know anything about. And I think fairly few astronomers looked on that kind of UFO involvement as being at all palatable. On the other hand, beginning with things like the Drake equation, the idea of life at around other stars in the universe at a distance began to be more palatable. And gradually, I think things like the SETI Institute have promoted that and made that that's pretty respectable. But I think most astronomers don't take the ET is here hypothesis for UFOs as a serious issue. And most astronomers, I don't think, have even considered these paranormal explanations or discussions of UFOs, relating them to the things like in Passport to Magonia, to the old legends. I doubt if 1 in 50 astronomers has even heard of that when they think about.
So you're not just any astronomer, though. So what are your thoughts?
My thought is that I think let's go from the far out to closer up. Far out, I'm sure as I am about anything in in astronomy that there is life out around some other star. I'm pretty sure that there's likely to be some kind of intelligence, and whether it's the intelligence that's anything at all like ours around a planet around some other star, I don't know. I have a feeling that intelligences in space could be stranger than we're likely to imagine.
Oh yeah.
When we get to close-up things like the Greys, one of the things that makes me think they're not ET, so they seem not strange enough in a way. That they seem like people that with the motivations and the shapes of humans and not thinking differently enough. And so I'm pretty skeptical of the normal ET hypothesis. I think if ET has visited, the way they do it and any marks they may have left will turn out to be much more subtle and maybe things that you wouldn't find as in some science fiction stories have it, things that you wouldn't know about until your own technology had gotten up to some level that you could to even know what you were looking at.
Right. Well, and that brings up an interesting point. Something we've talked about on the other show, Weird Mysterious Library, which, by the way, everyone should be watching anyway. But yeah, I mean, to the point of technology. I've brought up the idea of the Spookatron 5000. Where we can't really observe paranormal activity properly, objectively, because we don't have the technology for it. To your point, I think it's a great idea. It's like we may not, if there was, again, extraterrestrials from another planet who has visited Earth, we may not recognize it for what it is until we reach a level of technology that could perceive that. Because just as we, as we make technology also makes us.
I think that's a good point. You've given a good. I've heard you give a good analogy in another issue on another program, as having to do with the microorganisms and causing disease. And you go back to medieval times as something before the microscope and try to convince people that there are these little living creatures that can make you sick, rather than the miasma floating in the air around you or whatever that people had. And it's the same way, even on a lower level, if you go back to Victorian times, say you're not at a time where telescopes are already around, but you're an astronomer, and there are these little fuzzy objects in the sky. Some of them look like little spirals. But most people think our galaxy is the only galaxy there is of stars in the universe. And not until the 20th century, when telescopes in photography get to the point where you can see that these other fuzzy objects are actually made of stars themselves, to realize that we're one of many. There are many galaxies in the universe around us. It may be that, for example, the SETI issue searches for life with radio waves often. There are some other techniques proposed now. And we think, that's, if you're going to search now, that's the only thing we have to use. Radio waves, light waves of some kind.
Right.
The speed of light. And it may be that in 100 years, we find out, the amazing Z-ray is what you need, that travels 50 times faster and can go from planet to planet, and you
the tachyon.
Yes, your tachyon being a hypothetical object that goes faster than the speed of light. I actually did a sophomore summer project on tachyons when I was in college. I didn't find any.
All right, we're gonna have to have you back so we can talk about the tachyon. Well, they said, I mean, this is actually a great point. And when you were talking about, just made me think of it in the both book, in the book and in the film. Hunt for Red October, right? The Russians had developed this magnetic caterpillar drive, and so there's no moving parts. And they were talking. They said, "Well, what should we listen for?" And they said it wouldn't sound like a propeller. It would sound like maybe a geologic thing, or some sort of weird seismic anomaly. It wouldn't sound like this. So the point is, because they didn't know what the technology was, they had no idea what they were picking up. It would sound like a natural event, essentially. And that's kind of what you're saying, is if they really are, these creatures were getting here and they were sophisticated enough, their technology may actually resemble what we would consider to be just a natural phenomena.
Right. Some people have said, well, maybe we should be looking out at our astronomical imaging of the sky for things that we have thought are natural, but maybe some of them aren't. I don't think anyone's found persuasive evidence of that yet, but maybe, of course, we're not deep enough thinkers yet to be able to do that. But it's possible. And the way I hope it is, I actually would be kind of sad if we were limited to the speed of light and with most never getting to talk to our neighbors if they exist. I like those space programs. I like Star Trek. I like even Babylon 5.
Yeah, darn Skippy you do. Darn Skippy you like Babylon 5.
I think it's those. Sorry, you go, Horace.
I hope we do get out there. Maybe it's going to be dangerous if we do, but
because it's perfectly safe here.
Friends with the Klingons. So I think one of the odd things is too, you're going to run into, if they really do that, you're going to run into a lot of species that probably have been around a lot longer than you have, and whether you can even talk to them, I don't know. They said they may think, here's a nice little squirrel coming up to us. I think he wants some food.
Or they might think we're a rat.
Can't really talk to us.
Or they might think we're a rat and just want to exterminate us. But I think your point about the Greys being too much like us is dead on. And I think one of the reasons these things tend to resemble us in UFO lore so much has a lot to do with the type of science fiction we're talking about. Whether it's the Star Treks, where there's all these different races, but they're pretty much limited in having to use actors who are either painted blue or dressed in a suit. So they're always going to be anthropomorphized. I think some science fiction might point at the type of alternatives that you're suggesting, though, Horace, those more sophisticated ones. And one is obviously 2001: A Space Odyssey, whether you read Clarke's book or whether you watch Kubrick's film. And the other is P.K. Dick's Valis series and some of the experiences he had, where he thought something like the Black Knight satellite might have been hitting him with messages which were somehow, trying to trigger a spiritual enlightenment or send him coded messages. So I wonder if, I'm not a big believer in some type of extraterrestrial led evolution of the species, but I wonder if that might be the way that these things encounter us or engage with us anyway. It might never be physical. And then I'm not even sure how you see it or how you find it.
I don't know. And I don't think there's any way we can tell from what we know now, whether it would be seen as if they did, would it be seen as a religious kind of experience? How does that tie in with people's religious beliefs? And of course, in religion and Christian religion, there are beings beyond, different from humans.
Yeah.
But and some of which do not interact very much, perhaps, with us. And I have ideas that one of his early astronomy books may have led H.P. Lovecraft to think about seraphim in a seraphim in the sky as a model for some aspects of his creatures he created, not in personality or nature so much as a mode of transportation.
Yeah.
One of the first, but that's another subject. But.
No, that's fascinating. You can, because I know you have that Lovecraft astronomy book upcoming about Lovecraft's interest in astronomy. You can tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
I'd love to as well, of what we can expect.
Now you may or may not be a Lovecraft fan if you're a listener here, but his writing is very influential in science fiction and fantasy in the 20th century and beyond. Now, he was born in 1890, died young in 1937, so he's been gone a long time. But he was very interested in astronomy, and that helped mold his view. As a teenager, he was a dyed-in-the-wool amateur astronomer. Most of his life, he lived in poverty. He couldn't afford anything. But when he was very young, his mother indulged him till they started running out of funds. He was able to buy a telescope, and telescopes were a lot more expensive relative to the wages back then than they are today. And he began to observe the sky. He self-published his own astronomy journals, the Rhode Island Journal of Astronomy, which is online now at Brown University. And you can look at him. I grew up. He was in Providence. In fact, S.T. Joshi's biography of him is called I Am Providence. It's Life and Times of H.P. Lovecraft. And I grew up in eastern Connecticut. That Willimantic is a little factory town in northeastern Connecticut. So the same part of the country as Providence, but not so big a city, just a little town, a mill town. And when I grew up, reading H.P. Lovecraft, learned of his interest in astronomy. I thought, wow, this is someone who had beginnings like me. I was not so happy when I learned of his racist beliefs, which unfortunately are true. We know more about them probably than of other people at the time because he wrote lots and lots of letters that are saved, and I'm sure many other people held those beliefs, but we don't know about them so much.
Yeah.
But one of the first books he read was one of the most popular astronomy books of the 19th century in the United States, which was Geography of the Heavens. And in that book, just when he was very young and he read it, he would have come across this hypothetical case that actually was borrowed for that book from an earlier book. He said, imagine the seraphim flying through space at a speed far exceeding the speed of light. Said we can imagine wings, they're often considered winged beings. We can imagine them flying for thousands of years, for 6,000 years, because which presumably comes from the Bishop Usher estimate of the age of the universe, at a speed far exceeding light, and said, we imagine that probably that seraphim will never go beyond the bounds of creation. Says if he did, he would be astounded to think that he had somehow encompassed a good part of God's plan for the universe, but that's not likely to happen for any creature with a non-infinite mind or something along those lines. And I've always thought that later, when Lovecraft began to write his own fictions, one of the ways he has his great old gods and Migo traverse the ether is with wings rather than in spaceships. You don't find spaceships generally so much in most of Lovecraft's writing. And I've always thought that maybe it goes back to his childhood and imagining those flying seraphim crossing through the universe.
Wow, that's fascinating.
But later on, of course, he quickly turned away from religion. He came up with the philosophy of cosmicism, where people are insignificant compared to the universe. And he said, I can't really believe in a God at least a God that cares about people. When I think of the scale of the universe, I better have a drink of water here, or I will
No, you do, Horace.
get a little dry.
Horace is getting hoarse, huh?
He was very atheistic later on,
Yeah.
or at least if there was a vast intelligence, he didn't think it would be an intelligence that would care about the lives of humans.
Mm-hmm.
But the vastness of his scale of the universe was something pretty new in the science fiction.
Right.
And thinking back the vast times in the past and vast instances and beings other than people who didn't care about people, who were there before us, be there after us, and we might have to watch out for, we might have to fear if they come and could destroy us. But that has had a big influence on science fiction.
Yes.
And
on ancient astronaut theory as well.
Oh,
yes,
absolutely.
and those ideas, I think, of people on Earth, beings on Earth, before people, influencing people whether they wanted or not, as I think did have an influence on ancient astronaut theories, and I think people have pointed that out before, and I think that's quite likely the case. So Eddie Guimont and I have written a book about H.P. Lovecraft and astronomy, and it's the chapters kind of alternate between biography, Lovecraft's from his childhood relationship to astronomy, to the crash of his life when he realized he wasn't good enough at mathematics to become an astronomer, to his later just fun going out and observing total eclipses. He was fortunate enough, even though he never had any money to travel very far, he was able to see 2 total solar eclipses from New England, just 7 years apart. And he had his own telescope. He'd show people the stars. And he was very upset if people wrote science fiction stories or any kind of story and they got the constellations wrong. If he had someone in the summer in Michigan watching Orion in the evening, he would get very upset. So he always sent he would send other writers planispheres with the stars on them so that they get the stars right. And this was something that upset Ambrose Bierce too in his writing. He wrote a little pamphlet called "The Moon in Letters," pointing out all the mistakes that writers made about what phase of the moon could be seen when, and
that's great.
Impossible phases of the moon. So when the stars were right appears in H.P. Lovecraft's book as on 2 scales. One is when it allowed certain things to be released, some beings would come back or be released. But it was also when the stars were right, had to be, if you were telling a story and you talked about Sirius or Arcturus, you better have it right.
Is that the title of the book? Is that the title of the book?
It might be. We've suggested
that's a great title. No, it's a great
H.P.
title.
Lovecraft and Astronomy, When the Stars Are Right, is our suggestion.
Yeah.
We'll see if the publisher goes along with it.
Well, because everybody knows those passages about Cthulhu. He rises up from ancient R'lyeh when the stars are right. So it's such an iconic line from Lovecraft, I think. Fantastic.
And he meant it. Yes, he meant it on 2 levels.
Yeah. No, that's why it's so wonderful. I didn't even know the second level until tonight. And I'm a Lovecraft fan. I loved how in Willimantic Skies, actually, which is such a wonderful book, I wasn't expecting it. Lovecraft even pops up in there when you talk about the 1909 great airship, or the airship mystery, which when it flew over New England. And of course, there's airship hoaxes and flaps dating back to at least 1896, 1897, but this was one in 1909 when this airship was flying over New England. And apparently Lovecraft, who was 19 at the time, was out on the streets, I guess, of Providence, and he saw all these people pointing at what they said was the airship, and he had to step forward and correct them and say, no, that's just Venus. And I thought that was just fantastic.
Yeah.
He said, yes, it was right before Christmas, and there a lot of Christmas shoppers were out on the street, and he sees this group. He says they're pointing at the sky. He says, wow, people are really getting interested in astronomy finally. And he goes over and he's sitting there talking. Look, there's the airship. I can see its searchlight now. And he had to apprise them that that was not an airship. That was Venus. And,
that's funny. Well, I knew that, like, that's the thing about Venus is that there were trains in the early days that literally were stopped because they thought another train was coming because it was right on the tracks. And so they would they would freak out. Apparently this was a very common thing for a lot of in the early days. Yeah.
I think Jimmy Carter's UFO sighting was really a Venus. I think
I've heard that. I don't know if that is still thought to be the case or not. I haven't looked into that in a while. But if you do drive down a road, if you're in the middle of Nebraska or somewhere where the views are very long, and the Jupiter or Venus happens to ride a line with your road, it does look like there's something out there.
It happened to me. No, that actually happened to me. I was working third shift, or technically late second shift, but I had to stay late because we had a thing go on, and I'm driving and I look over and there's just the brightest light, because normally it's 3 a.m. there's nothing, I mean, there's still lights, it's still Dallas, but I'm driving south and I'm like, what is going on? I'm driving and I keep looking over like, what is this bright light? And I just realized, oh, it's Venus. It was just right there. But I'm like, what in the heck am I looking at? And then I was like, it's Venus, dummy. It's like, and
there's a case like we were talking about earlier. People 150 years ago would probably have known that it was Venus because they're farmers. If they're out at night, there are no lights. There are no cars in the distance. They're familiar, more familiar with the constellations probably than we typically are today.
Oh, they would have been very aware, again, for planting purposes, even religious purposes. Like they were just more aware. And then we get a few generations of mechanization and clocks and we forget everything.
That's true. I keep having this vision that someday, instead of going out to look at the night sky, you'll put on your virtual reality helmet and it'll be your local planetarium and you'll look around, but you'll never see what the real sky is. You'll just see the simulated
simulation. Yeah.
I don't think we're that far from that. Now, I'm lucky that I live rurally. I can go out and look at the stars and really see here. But I'll tell you what, in Sydney, when you were in the city, you could hardly see any stars in the sky. The light pollution was just... And so as we become more urbanized and the suburbs grow, and I think the reality is looking up, you mightn't even see anything. So maybe that VR type experience will be the only hope for people to see the heavens in the future. I don't even think we're that far away from it. I know you've probably seen the app. I bet you like it, Horace. I don't play a whole lot with tablets or the like, but I've played with this once when somebody else had it. Is you have these apps where you can hold them up and they will show you the constellations, like it knows where you are. So that is a pretty cool app.
That's a change from when I was growing up. So you can hold it up if you're out at night, and it will show you exactly what you're pointed at in the sky and identify it with you. I'm not sure I'm an old school. I'm not sure I totally go with that rather than memorizing what the constellation should be. But a lot of people use it, and I'm sure it's helpful. And Dean should be... now that the sun is getting more active, Dean should be getting more cases of northern lights to look at as we go into the sun picking up a little steam. Has to be a big one to get down to Texas.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I'm like, that is, trying to see the northern lights is on my bucket list because if I'm seeing them from where I'm at, we got much bigger problems. Like if I
have
walk out,
been.
yeah, no, it's like, but if I'm looking out and I see that, I'm going to be like, okay, well, there goes the neighborhood.
There have been cases, for example, the Carrington event
Yes.
in 1859
Mhm.
that burnt out a lot of telegraph
Yep.
stations where the aurora was seen down into the tropics.
Yeah.
So it does happen from time to time, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And
But if it happens, we got bigger problems.
then probably a lot of satellites are gone, and possibly electrical grid too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we talked about that on another show a while back. That's one of those things that people don't get. It's like if we get hit by a CME, it's over. Like we're decades from rebuilding all of this. You know, with the I mean, there's probably some things that would be reserved and be protected, but yeah, it would be an unpleasant morning to wake up for many, many people to find civilization and just collapse.
That'd be great northern lights while it happened.
Oh yeah, no, it'd be awesome.
And the lights would be out. So
Yeah, there'd be no light pollution anymore.
Yep.
Well, we have to have you back, Horace, sometime to chat again because you're just a wealth of knowledge, and it was such a great joy talking to you.
I hope I haven't led you astray too much.
No.
Oh, we were led astray a long time ago. You don't even factor into our astrayness.
Well, it was a delight to be here and be invited, and I thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? We have to have you back when that Lovecraft book drops. Let us know, and
Yes.
we'll definitely have you back.
Hopefully next year sometime.
Okay, excellent. Always please keep us in the loop. And thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for always listening and watching the show as well, and to you and to everybody else watching. In the meantime, keep it weird.
Good night.